Hi, I'm Brian Russell. Welcome back to class. In this talk for my Biblical Hebrew course, I want to work through the actual verbal forms that show up in our reading, Amos 7:10 to 17. So what I have up here on the board, and it's written from right to left as it would be in the Hebrew text, are every verbal form in verses 10 to 17. I say every in the sense of every unique form because there are some repetitions, and so I'm not going to parse the same exact verb form twice, but I want to walk through these with you to help you in your own work. Now, what becomes immediately apparent when you read Biblical Hebrew is that just learning the paradigms from our beginning Hebrew grammars isn't enough, because most of the verbs that you run into, and this will be illustrative, and this happens in almost every text, are different than the paradigms, because most verb forms have a weak consonant or two in them, which create changes in the morphology, in the way that the words actually look. So again, the key, though, for being able to parse verbs effectively and thus be able to enjoy reading Biblical Hebrew is know your basic forms of the verb in all of its stems and in all the different verbal types. I don't mean know massive paradigms for each one of those, but just know the basics, like know the third masculine singular perfect, the third masculine singular imperfect, the participle form, the infinitive absolute, the infinitive construct, the imperative. Know those forms for each stem for the strong form. Of course, you need to know your imperfect preformatives and suffirmatives and your perfect suffirmatives. And then essentially you're ready to begin parsing. And so if you know those basics, this talk and walk through ought to help you, because I'm going to try to point out the differences and some of the clues to be able to parse these verbs. So let's walk through these. So the first verb that we run into in verse 10, yishlach, what you're looking for and what you should notice immediately is the beginning of this form. You see the vav with the doubled consonant. That's the sign of your past narrative or imperfect with vav consecutive. That also then signals that when you have this doubling, that this first consonant, the yod in this case, is the preformative, the prefix. So this is going to be a third masculine singular past narrative. Now in this case, starting from the back, the root is obvious, and the only difference in this form from a paradigm form would be this letter here, which is an A-class vowel. The paradigm would have a holum here, but we have a guttural, so this is a third guttural root, and the only change from a strong verb in this case is that you have an A-class vowel, which often happens with gutturals. So this would be a call, third masculine singular, past narrative, or imperfect with vav consecutive. Our second verb, lamor, again, the root here, this is a common vocabulary word, so it's pretty evident. This is from the amar, the word to say. Now, what's the clue on the parsing? Well, if you find a verbal form that has a lamed on it, a great guess, the lamed is that it's a preposition and that this is a infinitive or an infinitive construct, depending on, again, the descriptive grammar that you're going to use. And in this case, there's no other signs of any root or of any stem, so this is essentially your call infinitive from amar. Again, the only thing that's a little different from a strong verb is that you have this is a first aleph verb, so you're not going to get a shavah in this case underneath of it, so you get this lengthened vowel here. Okay, kashar. Now here is our one example of a strong verb in this verse. This is exactly as the paradigm. This is an easy one. This would be your actual lexical form. This is your call, perfect, 3ms from the consonants that are visible. Now, this verb is a difficult one and it is irregular. Now it does happen frequently enough that you'll get used to seeing it. This is the verb. It's from yakal. And there's not a lot of clues. The only clue of what kind of verb it might be is that this is your imperfect performative. So we do have an imperfect here. And this is third feminine singular from the context. This is that phrase where it says the land is not able. It's talking about Amos's words. So this is going to be imperfect third feminine singular. Now, this vowel is unusual. It's essentially because this root, this particular first yod, derives from what would have originally been a first vav verb. So the first consonant originally would have been vav in this particular verb form. Again, you'll get used to seeing this, but sometimes you'll get a sharuk, sometimes you'll get a holem vav and that's the actual vav showing back up, but it shows up back up as a vowel. So this is your third feminine singular. Again, this is a call. No sign of any other stem here. And this particular verb, because is able, or in this case it's negative, is not able, it's going to be completed in its meaning with an infinitive, and then lo and behold, a little bit later in the verse, we find this particular form. Again, things that jump out immediately, you see a lamed in the back, so that's, if it's a verbal form, you're thinking infinitive. Now, what's the root? You might think it's these three letters, but that's not going to be the clue of what we have here is this. In this particular verb form is a hiphil infinitive. Okay, a hiphil infinitive. It's signaled by the H and this hirik yod. So we have a hiphil. And the root is kol. Again, you may not be able to immediately pick that up. But since this is infinitive, you have a lamed, and you have, since the H, you could look it up, but H, kaf, lamed isn't a root. And so you can then say, okay, the H must be a signal that this is a hiphil, and then the hirik yod confirms that. Hirik yod is a good signal that you have a hiphil verb. And so this is a hiphil infinitive from kol. And this one's a little bit hard. You can look up the middle week verbs and take a look at those in our grammar books and look at some paradigms. But that one's a little bit hard. Well, let's go on to verse 11. Okay, again, in this case, you start off with a really easy one, amar. So this is call, third masculine singular, perfect. From Amar. That's exactly as you said. He said. Okay. Yamut. Again, this is where vocabulary helps. Hopefully you see the root, the word for he died. Lamed, or I'm sorry, the yod here is an imperfect prefix. So that's three masculine singular, imperfect. And then what's the root? It's mot. And then what's the stem? There's no indication that this is anything other than a call. Now, since this is again one of these middle week roots, if this were going to be a hiphil, so take a look at your master paradigm sheet, and for those in the class talking about the worksheet that we handed out there, take a look at what a hiphil imperfect looks like. You would have had a hirik yod vowel in here. So this is just your call indicator in this particular case. So this is a call imperfect third masculine singular. Now our next set of verbs, this happens twice in Amos. So notice it happens in this verse, and then it happens. It's either in verse 16 or verse 17. This is the same root repeated 2 times in a row. You can see the root in each case. It's galah. This is the verb for go into exile. And this is a emphatic formulation that you'll see. So whenever you see this form, and what do we have here? Let's start with the easy one, yigle. It's good. We have all three consonants. This is a call, third masculine singular imperfect from Gala. Okay. He will go into exile. Now this word, again, if you look at your paradigm, this is the paradigmatic form of an unusual type of verb, but you will see it especially in this formulation. This is, again, an emphatic, syntactically, this is exegetically significant because this isn't say will go into exile. This is will truly, will indeed, will surely go into exile. And that adverbial idea comes off of this. This is a call, infinitive, absolute, or as Cook and Homestead call this is the adverbial infinitive. Okay, when you have the adverbial infinitive with a verb of an imperfect of the same root, emphatic. So this is a powerful phrase here, and this is the one thing that Amaziah got right, that Amos was indeed saying that, but it wasn't Amos saying it; it was God saying it. Okay, verse 12. Vayomer. And this is one of the more common forms in the Old Testament. Again, notice the vav consecutive at the front. That tells you that this is a prefix. So we know that we have a 3ms, either past narrative or imperfect with vav consecutive. I'll put P in for past narrative. It's from Amar. So this is a call. No signals of any other verbal type there. So this is just this is one of the more common forms that you'll see. What's strange about this word, this is a first aleph verb. And so the aleph, the technical word is it's quiescing, so it's not really making a sound, and so you end up getting a lengthened vowel in this case. But that is unusual morphologically, but it's so common you'll just get used to seeing that. But notice the signals. You got the vav consecutive on the front. And those of you in the class, if you want to open up the Arnold Choi book to look at an important piece, you want to learn to distinguish between the past narrative or the imperfect and vav consecutive from the regular imperfects. So take a look at 3.5.1 in the Arnold Choi book, and let's make that the syntax lesson and read about how you translate imperfects plus vav consecutives, but we'll say more about that in the coming weeks. Okay, then we get a collection of imperatives that show up here. Lake, this one's a little hard to parse because you might just look at this and think, oh, I got a suffix, second masculine singular suffix, and a preposition lamed. It's going to look a little different. That's a good guess. Wouldn't fit the context. And then what you need to think about was what might this be? What letters dropped off? And what this is the common verb halak, go or walk. And this is a call, second masculine singular imperative. Call imperative, 2ms from halak. Again, in this case, there's two verbs that you want that act kind of like have weak consonants. Halak is one. I'm going to write these here, and we'll see both examples here. Halak acts like it's a different type of verb. The H will drop off. And then the other word, which we'll see later, the verb for take, the lamed will act as though it's a first noon verb. So there are just a couple of irregular verbs, but we can get a handle on that just remembering them. So just note this form. Now, the next word, barak, this, other than the fact that you have this vowel here because of the guttural, this is your textbook strong verb, form of a imperative. Again, this is another call, imperative, second masculine singular. Again, the sign of the imperative, look at your sheet. The imperative looks a lot like an infinitive, like the infinitive of the infinitive construct. So it's going to be context, but this is clearly a verbal sequence. Remember, infinitive constructs will often have a lamed on them. Okay, so it's easier to distinguish in this case a selection of imperative forms. Again, the only difference, you might have thought, if you memorized the form, you would have expected a holum up here. There isn't because, again, a guttural. We saw this previously in this particular verb. Gutturals prefer that A-class vowel, so that's the only difference from the paradigm of a call imperative. Okay, the next verb is another imperative. Now, it has, I should have written out the whole piece there. If you look at verse 12, and I don't have room to squeeze it in now, in verse 12, at the end of this particular verb, you have the makaf and then sham, so it's going to be this eat there, and this ending that's attached to this, that changes the way that this is vocalized, so you get some reduced vowels. But this is another call, second masculine singular imperative from here. Now, again, what would the paradigm would have been? Because this is a guttural, you're going to get this. You're going to get the compound shava here. But this vowel here is actually the O. This is the kamatz katuf. Because again, for an imperative, I'll go to a strong form. If this was by itself, it would have looked like this. You would have had a holum here, and then you still would have had the compound shava because of the olive. But this vowel, when it reduces, when the holum reduces in this case, this is not a kamatz, this is not the long A, this is the O vowel here, and that's the signal of what you have. But again, that's because the accent's here, and so this is an unaccented closed syllable, and that's going to give you that vowel reduction. So you can go back and look at that video on vowels that I have created for you, and this is an example of that. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Here we have 10V. Again, this is a textbook example. Now, the good news is we have 3 good consonants here, and you may know this vocabulary word navi. This is the word for prophesy. Now, what other clues do we have? I noticed that there's a doubling doggish there, and I have a tav at the front. Now, what's the tav indicate? That's going to be a prefix, so that's going to be a second masculine singular of an imperfect. Then what stem do we have? Now, this is where it's important. Now, what does this doubling indicate? That indicates that something has assimilated into this noon. Now, what's a consonant that assimilates a lot? It's the noon. So this is an example of the nifal imperfect. Remember, where no vowel separates, noon assimilates, and so if this was it would have been the tav prefix, the noon that indicates the nifal, and then the actual noon from the verb root, and so you get this doubling. So a great indicator that you have an imperfect nifal is going to be prefix, doubled first radical, and then the kamatz vowel. Look at your paradigm chart. This is really a textbook example of a nifal imperfect, and so you will prophesy. Okay, verse 13 starts off with another kind of difficult form. This verb comes from the word for add or again, and the clues here. Oops. This verb is a lot like. Well, this is an original first yod verb. So this is from the root yasaf. This is a first yod verb that originally was another one of these first vav verbs like we saw up here at the top. And so this is going to be, the hirik yod tells us it's a hifil. So this is a hifil imperfect. In this case, he's given him a command to stop doing this. So this is a 2 masculine singular. You will not again. He's going to tell him what he can't do again. Hifil imperfect second masculine singular from yasaf. So notice this verb, a little tricky. This is what an original first vav looks like. And so you have this holum vav rule. But another irregular verb. And this is another verb like yokol. This one is going to take an infinitive to complete the meaning. And so let's go down here, and the infinitive lehinave. It's right here. This comes from nava. Again, we just saw imperfect form of it. Now, the lamed at the front signals infinitive or infinitive construct. Now, don't let the H make you think hifil. Notice on your sheet again that the nifal infinitive has an H added. In fact, also does the imperative does as well. And the difference between the hifil and the nifal is, it's a nifal because notice the noon's assimilated again, so you have this doubled radical, and again, the kamatz vowel here. If this were a hifil, there would be no dogish here. You'd still have an H. You'd probably have a hirik yod here, but this vowel pattern is the paradigmatic nifal pattern. Okay? All right, let's keep going. Vayan, this is a common type of verb. This is a third hey verb. You think of verbs like asa, to do, very common. And the clue to parsing is to see up front, you have the imperfect plus vav consecutive, the past narrative. So we know it's third masculine singular, put past narrative. And then just remember in third hey verbs, especially in these past narrative forms, you're going to get apocopation, so there's no final consonant. So that if you didn't know this verb, the hard part is there's only two consonants showing. Again, I'm going to do a different video on how to kind of work through options. So when you only have two consonants showing, what are some of your options? Just kind of think through those. Maybe this was a first yod. We can look that up. It's not going to work. Maybe this was a middle weak verb. Well, you would have expected to see some letter here as well. So just remember third hey, you have apocopation. So probably an easy guess when you only have two consonants of the root showing is see if this was originally a third hey verb, which is what it is. So this is just simply a call, imperfect, or imperfect plus vav consecutive or past narrative, third masculine singular from ana, ayin, noon, hey. Let's go to verse 15. Vav consecutive at the front. Again, I notice I have a doubled radical, so perhaps I'm thinking this is a nifal. It looks like it could be. I'll explain why. This morpheme here at the end might throw you off, but this is the pronominal suffix. And this is first common singular suffix. So what do we have left? We have two consonants left. We know it's a imperfect with vav consecutive, so we'll put this as a past narrative. Third masculine singular. And then what's the root? We only have these two letters left. Something is assimilated, so maybe you're thinking this is a first noon. If you looked it up, you wouldn't find it. And what this is that irregular verb lachach, took, and the lamed of these verbs acts as though it's a first noon verb. So it's going to act like a first noon, though it's a first lamed verb. So just note that. So this would be past narrative or imperfect plus vav consecutive, call, third masculine singular with a first common singular suffix attached to it. So the Lord took me. Hinave. We've seen this verb again. This is the verb prophesy. Notice the H on the front, doubled radical. This is a nifal. And this is in form, it's either the infinitive construct or the infinitive. Let me just double check my text here again real quick to make sure I'm not misreading that. Yeah, and this is in fact, this is the imperative in this case. From the context, you can see that. So this is nifal, second masculine singular, imperative. All right, we're on the home stretch now. Verse 16, Shema. This is almost textbook. This is a second masculine singular call, imperative from Shema, only difference being this A-class vowel. If this were not a guttural, we would have had a holum here, but this is a third guttural verb, so we get the A-class vowel. Otherwise, this is straight up. Omer, this form, again, this is easy to spot, vocabulary, but notice this vowel pattern. What is that? That's the vowel pattern for the call participle. Masculine, singular, and in this case, absolute, it's not bound. Okay, and what do we have here? This we have an imperfect A-class vowel, Hirik Yod. This is a Hifil. Moving on to verse 17. That's either your 3FS or your second masculine singular. In this case, it's talking about Amaziah's wife. And so this is a imperfect 3FS. Good, 3 strong consonants. Now this is a third hey, so you get a little difference in the vowels, but you can see the whole root here. So this is call imperfect, third feminine singular from Zana, to be a prostitute. Okay, this form, Yipol, notice we have a doubled second radical. I noticed the yod here, and notice this morpheme. So these are the kind of the 3 signals that we're working with. If this isn't a first yod, the yod Sharuk there tells us that's 3 masculine plural imperfect. Notice that what would be the signal? That would be a noon assimilation. So this is from Nafal. And that's the value you would expect. So that's a call imperfect third masculine plural from Nafal, where no vowel separates, the noon assimilates. Again, go to this verb. Hopefully you see the root. That's from mot, for death. Again, this is where vocabulary helps. This is a middle weak verb. This is exactly what we'd expect from the paradigm. If this was going to be a Hifil, you'd have a Hirik Yod. Since it's just the Sharuk, this is going to be your call imperfect. This is a direct address to Amaziah, second masculine singular. And that is our final verb. Again, hopefully I didn't go over that too quick, but just slow it down, work through your work. And again, the key to understanding verbs is just to make observations. Notice the types of things that I made remarks on, and slowly this will become easier as you begin to see the patterns. I know the final form of the board looks pretty crazy here if you're jumping into this late, but I walk through each and every verb. If you were able to follow what I did, you're in a good place right now. So don't stress too much. And there are a couple of difficult ones. If you have any questions, let me know.